Oh, UK Crime Book Club. Well, let's see, Nick. Let's see whether
Hello,
we are in
Sam. How
fact
are you?
live. I'm good, thank you. You're here to talk about the third Jan book, The Dark
Yes.
Edge, and I am. Oh, you disappeared for a moment then,
And
and
so did you, but you're back again, I'm glad to see.
so you're here to talk about The Dark Edge, the third book in Jan's series, and tell us a little bit about it.
Okay. Well, this is the book. It came out in about a month ago, and it's the third book in the D.I. Jan Talentire series. Jan is a female detective who's based in North Devon in Barnstaple, and it's a new departure for me as of about 2 years ago. Started a second. The first books that I wrote were on the Gillard series, of which there were 12, and I'll talk a bit later about why I started a new series. But yeah, this particular book, it's the story of how a woman has fallen to her death from one of the highest cliffs in Devon. When the commissioner, the police and crime commissioner, personally asked Jan Talentire to investigate, she is taken aback. An accident doesn't require a DI, but Jan soon realizes there's far more to it than first meets the eye. The witnesses at the scene all had a connection to the victim, Joanne Dexter, and Joanne's work forced her into close contact with some dangerous people. Could she have got on their bad side, or was her killer someone closer to home? So what's kind of different about the time is that because I planned the whole thing from beginning to end, it was part of an deal that I signed with Hello and W. Powell audiobook company back at the 2023. I was able to plan the whole kind of narrative arc, not just each book standing alone, as it does with a crime, but also some of the secondary plots that run right through the series. And one of those, anyone who's already started reading any of the Talentire books, I think apart from the first one, will have come across a character called Brent Best, who's a former lover of Jan's and a very senior police officer. And this is a secondary plot in 3 or 4 books, but it becomes quite important, and it reaches its conclusion in book 4, which is the next one to this. But it's kind of a Me Too type of plot, and it runs as an undercurrent in the book. And so what I'm trying to do is, as well as having each plot, in some sense, is a conventional murder mystery, you have something that will keep people interested from one book to the other. So it's like the difference between writing a small piece of music and writing a symphony. I mean, each one of these books is like a movement in a symphony, and at some points the secondary plot gets bigger, and other points it's in the background. So it's a much more ambitious thing than I attempted to do with Gillard, where because when I wrote the first Gillard book, I didn't actually have a publisher at that time. I had my own interest, and having had a recommendation from my former agent, which was a lovely thing to happen. I had this book ready, and they were just starting crime thrillers. So each book in the Gillard series stood alone, and back elements of it was I was sort of stuck with what. Whereas with Talentire, I was able to plot a complete life history for her and a complete narrative arc about the development that happens to her as a woman and as a police officer in that time, and try and put it in the contemporary kind of area of misogyny and a woman's fight to try to establish her career in an area where there is a lot of resistance to it. And I have to say, it's still the case in the police that they are quite a long way behind most other employers in terms of the way that women are treated. And there's a huge attrition rate amongst female employees in the police. So you only have to look in the newspapers to see how realistic a lot of that is. But anyway, in the last ride, uh, Talentire had to be passing essentially this she was driving home from a minor crime where she was on the night shift in which in Devon and Cornwall is it's a huge area. You just have one detective inspector on duty for the whole region overnight, and they're pulled every which way. There always requires either for if let's say there's been a stabbing or something, and there wouldn't necessarily be a CSI team available in the night. It will be her forensic skills, which she arrives at the bar where there's been a punch up, but they need to know who said what, but also what the forensics tell them. So she was coming back from one of those kind of incidents when she heard about someone having fallen off a cliff, and normally this would be a police a uniform police constable's job, but until the uniforms arrived. And the curious thing is that it turns out when she's it's an incredibly high cliff, and it is a real cliff on the northwest coast of Devon, some of the highest cliffs in the area, and she is taken by some of the witnesses to actually look down the cliff. I'm afraid. Oh, you disappeared for a moment there, Sam. Hopefully, you didn't fall off a cliff.
I'm hoping
So
not.
she's taken to see the particular pool. Yeah, you went blank for a few seconds. As I say, I just hope it wasn't you falling off the edge. Anyway, she sees straight away, and there's a very who's got a red half and a couple of dogs who takes her up to the cliff edge and says, "That's where she fell. She's down there. You can see if you look over the edge." And she looks over and she can indeed see someone. And then there's this incredible coincidence occurs when she had been on a run in exactly the same area about 4 or 5 days before and had spoken to a woman who was a new member of her running group. And this woman looks exactly like that person. She's wearing running gear and she is 400 feet down from the cliff. And she thinks, oh my God, it could be Joanne. And, they'd only had a few minutes of conversation when they first met. And so you get this kind of a bit of a personal connection between the two. And it's not so much of a connection that she wouldn't be allowed on the case. Obviously, if she was a relative or something, that would never happen. And so it develops from here. You have, in some ways, there are things which happen in many murder mysteries that you have a lot of people with secrets. Everyone has a reason for telling a lie, and then the whole plot develops from there. There's also a writer who lives in a clifftop cottage, a guy called Lawrence Winterton, who has a very checkered past. And we sample some of his writings on the way. So, yeah, I hope people will
We,
like it.
you have got a lot of interesting characters in this, and when each of the characters initially has any contact with the police, they're not the most helpful people. Whether they've got anything to hide or not,
No,
they're not very welcoming, are they?
no, no. Everyone has their own reasons for wanting to go quickly. And of course, one of the people there is the victim's mother, who lives in a care home and has got dementia, and someone has to look after her. And she actually doesn't know. It was really very stormy morning when Joanne fell off, and she actually believes that Joanne went to try and retrieve her hat, which had blown off in the wind, and it ends up being Talentire who has to explain to her that actually no, Joanne's gone, and she'll sort of hand over to the uniforms to complete that task. So right from the start, you have a lot of people who really don't want to be where they are, and then how many who are the people who could have pushed her, and if she was pushed, why are there not witnesses to her being pushed? So you do get quite a lot of mystery to begin with. Um, so, I mean, I like to think that each of my books has an original plot, and although it's not original for someone to fall off a cliff, I think the way that the story develops, you see towards the end that this is quite unlike anything you will have read before. And that's my aim in every book, to try to make sure that here. I mean, so often you read in crime fiction, you've got a serial killer, or you've got a satanic cult or something like that. But I always try to steer clear from those things that do come up time and time again. And it's not always easy to find a completely original plot, but
Mm.
it's up to what the readers think, whether they think it's original or not.
I think there's plenty of original stuff in it. Obviously, the falling off a cliff and, did she fall, was she pushed, is kind of one of the themes, but we know that right from the beginning. So
Yes.
that's not there's no spoiler in that. Um,
No.
but yeah, how you do everything else and how you had me suspecting everyone and having no clue of various things throughout the book. I think you said, we had a little chat just before we went live, and you said that there was an awful lot to weave together to make sure it all kind of tracked and
Yes.
followed.
Yes.
That's a lot of going back over the same thing, but you had help from other people as well. You've got writer friends, sorry, who read the book as well.
Yes. I mean, well, I have beta readers who always
The word I
look
was
at the book. So
looking
I have,
for.
yeah, yeah. Um, I have four beta readers, and they've been absolutely brilliant. Many of them have, book connections one way or another. My first reader is my wife, and she is very good at picking up lots of things which I think make it hard for people to read fiction in some ways. And it's just like the names of characters. If you have three characters, all whose first names begin with M, people are going to get them confused sometimes. So she's very quick to pick up on those kind of things. And as someone who's easily bored by a book that's not good, she's a very hard task mistress in terms of making sure that the book is genuinely going to keep her interested. So if she says, "Well, the tension sagged a bit there," then that, that's something you should look at. And then I have the four beta readers. One of them is as a friend, Tim, who I've known for almost 50 years now. We were at college together. He's an American, and he reads through Britishisms. So he's always saying, "Oh, well, Americans wouldn't understand what this is, or they wouldn't understand what that is," and it's really helpful. Because for example, I wouldn't have known that Americans didn't know what hard standing was. I'd have thought it might even have been an American word, but he said no, they don't know what that is. So I try, I could still use it, but then I explain what it is afterwards. So I try to make sure that anyone who uses, who's a English as a first or even as a second language will be able to understand the books. I mean, there's enough complexity going on in the plot, and I understand that my plots are not the simplest. But of course, readers are very clever these days. If you had a simple plot, people are going to find out who did it very quickly, well before the end. So I have to weave in some real subtlety in order to make sure that they don't guess. And so there's a lot of active misdirection going on. So yeah, the beta readers are important, and they all get to see it before it goes off to Canelo. And then, I mean, I suppose many of your uh, you know readers, viewers of this on the screen now will know the process goes from there. But it will go to my commissioning editor, what they call a desk editor, who looks through the story for overall sense. And that process may take 2 weeks, or if she's busy, it might take a month. And she'll look through, and she will decide. She say, well, perhaps you need to develop this a bit more. Looking back compared to the previous book, there's a similar theme in that. You need to differentiate that. So it's those big themes. So very, very good guidance, really standing back from it. And then when we've made any changes that are required there, it then goes to the copy editor, who will be the person who looks through for consistency. So, a very classic thing, of course, a character who had green eyes at the start of the book, if she has blue
Mm.
eyes by the end, that's her job to spot that. I mean, actually, it's my job. But if I hadn't done my job, she'll make sure that she spots that. So it's those kind of processes, and this is done with track changes on the Microsoft Word document. I'm sure many of the other writers who are listening in or watching in will understand that process. And then when all of that's done, and that again, that will take another maybe week or week and a half of my time, when I'm already probably writing the next book by then, and then it goes back again, and then it goes through goes to someone who just goes line by line for checking grammar and spelling, just basic proofreading.
Mm.
And then after that, of course, is always the process where it goes into print, and then you find out where the mistakes are. It's the iron law of publishing that only when the paperbacks come out do you discover the final one or two mistakes, because they'll always be there. And it doesn't matter how many times, how many layers you put into the editing process, there'll always be a couple of errors. And quite often it's sometimes when I actually sit down and read the book myself in paperback form, I think, oh God, what have I done there? Usually it's something tiny, not always.
I think
So
it's
yeah,
really
it's quite
interesting about the edits going. You know, you've got so many processes, but when you're reading it, I think because you've written it, your brain is going to read it in a certain way, and it might see things that it thinks are
yeah,
there that have actually been changed in another edit, or you might miss things because you could just skim something by accident. You need
yeah.
all of those readers, don't you? Because so many things could be thrown off otherwise that we just don't see after several reads.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, mistakes are inevitable, and of course, it shows you how many there must be in a manuscript of 80 to 85,000 words, that you can correct many hundreds of them, and still, one or two, usually tiny ones, get through. I mean, probably the biggest mistake that did get through to me and was pointed out by a reader is that I think it was about midway through the Gillard series, a reader wrote to me and said, well, you realise that you set a party in a building that burnt down in 2015. And I thought, oh, shit, have I done that? And the thing was that all of the websites about the building were still there and hadn't been updated. And you can't research everything face to face all the time. I mean, when I my first book that made it big, Bite, with the medical thriller, I did all my research face to face because that was the tail end of the 1990s. But now, of course, you do it on the internet, and of course, you rely on accurate information there. I mean, not excusing my mistakes, but you can see how they're made. So I fixed that in a subsequent edition of the book, but again, it was something that only emerged once the paperback had come out.
I don't think I'd mind. I was talking to Mark Billingham, I think it was last week or the week before. The
Yeah,
days blend into one another, don't they, when you work from home?
they
And
do.
he
They
was
do.
saying that somebody had written to him about the Bengal Lancer, which is Thorne and Hendrix's favourite takeaway, the
Right.
Indian Indian takeaway. And
Yeah.
I said, I don't think it matters that it isn't there anymore. I think it's nice that it lives on.
Yes. I
So
mean, I think that. I mean, if it was there when the first book was written about it, I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, we're not trying to write, a geographical history here. I mean, I think you can make too much of a rod for your own back if you actually weave in too much background. What I tend to do is I I describe real towns and obviously real cities and so forth. But when we get down to village level, I generally invent villages, anything smaller than that. So, for example, one of my biggest inventions for the Talentai series is the police and crime commissioner, and his name is Lionel Hall Hartington, and he married into money, and he runs a huge dairy place called the Sleepy Monk Creamery, which is a really big cheese manufacturer, and it's in Devon, just on the edge of the national park. But he lives in a stately home called Bitchcombe Manor, which is, I think, is quite a funny name, but it's quite believable when you actually see it's written Bych Coombe, and of course Coombe is very much a Devonian type of name. And so I invented that whole area, the stately home that it's part of, and in fact it becomes more and more into the book. In the fifth book, a really big series of scenes takes place at Bitchcombe Manor, actually at the commissioner's own home. But those kind of things, I love inventing them. And of course, if you invent something, then you're quite safe from these developments like the Bengal answer ones. Yeah, I mean, I really don't. I think Mark should probably be quite relaxed about someone feeding back that the restaurant had gone, um, because we're working against we're working in a fictitious environment, and I think it obviously the thing you have to be most careful about is real people. Now, um, obviously real people will crop up from time to time. I mean, I have, for example, when I was describing Brent West, who is this incredibly handsome and rather devious senior officer who's had a glittering career in the police, and he's effectively Talantar's nemesis. And I just said he looks a bit like the former James Bond Timothy Dalton. So it gives people a really decent idea of what he looks like, and I'm sure Timothy Dalton won't mind particularly. But there are other occasions when you sort of do need permission. So the police and crime commissioner, he's this great, very self-important sort of man in his 70s with a florid face and so on. And he has his wife comes to pick him up from meetings at the CID, and then she was going to pick him up after he'd had a drink or two and was going to take him back home. And he went into the gents at CID, and she said, "Oh, come on, Bagpuss, it's time for us to go. I've got a hair appointment in 2 minutes." So she used her pet name for him in front of all the police officers, and now everyone just refers to him as Bagpuss. Now, of course, it's quite a funny thing in itself, but I did go to so far as to make sure that I went to speak to the original producers of the Bagpuss cartoon and said, "Is it all right if I do that?" and explain the context in which I would use it. And they said, "Oh no, that's fine." But I feel much more comfortable having that in the book than not asking permission.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the thought of that. I suppose if there's going to be something that's very similar and could be used in you've got to be so careful, with music and song titles. But people,
Yeah.
I think, sometimes don't get given the thoughts that maybe the song lyrics do.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think I'm to work on the rule of thumb that if you can mention the title of a song without having to approach the music publishers, but if you take more than a line,
Mm.
especially if it's a famous line and everybody uses it, you could use it. But if you use several lines, then you've got to get permission. I mean, I do have, and the book's not come out yet, but I've used a Bob Dylan line where there's a drug dealer, and Talentire and her mates have staked out the place, and he's had several different homes, and this time they're raiding this place and they're sure he's going to be there, and they bang on the door, and one of the officers, and he's the drug dealer is called Evans. Anyway, so they bang on the door, and then the officer says, "Yeah, knock knock knocking on Evans' door." And so that's the Bob Dylan line, and I think I can get away with that without
Yeah,
seeking permission from the publishers, and it makes quite a nice throwaway line. I'd like to leaven conversations a little bit with the odd throwaway line like that. But yeah, I think a bit of humour in a book is good. You've got to be careful where you put it, of course, um, because most of what I'm doing is trying to create tension and anxiety, even in the reader. I want them to care about what's happening, and if you put a joke in the middle of that, then of course the tension sags. So you have to have these moments of rest, and that's where you can put your humour in. Whereas if you've got a really tense scene, there are going to be no jokes in that at all.
No references to a certain coffee maker that's apparently quite rancid. Can you remember what you've called the coffee maker in book 3?
Oh yes, I mean there's a coffee machine. It's a character in its own right that stands on the first floor in Barnstaple CID, and it's called Doctor Crippen by who after the famous poisoner in the early 20th century, and Doctor Crippen is a kind of a test for any recruit, and basically Talentire and all her colleagues warn everybody, say just don't use the machine because there's nothing in it that's drinkable. And it's based on a real coffee machine that I came across in my working career long before I was a writer. When I was working in London, and there was a machine, and I know I can remember the brand name, but I'm not going to tell you because they might still be going. And it produced
Yeah,
the most
best not.
unspeakable coffee. Best not to. And so I thought Dr. Crippen is quite a good character because when the police and crime commissioner comes up and says, "Anywhere I can get a coffee around here," and they say, "Oh well, the coffee machine's just at the end of the corridor." I want to go, because uh, it's going to be undrinkable, and they don't mind doing it to him because it was his idea that they, instead of buying a new coffee machine, that they could save some money by reconditioning an old one, and the result of that was Dr. Crippen. So when the commissioner says that's undrinkable and just drops it, it's a really good joke at his expense.
It did really make me laugh. Um,
Yeah.
excuse me. We have got some hellos, and I've had a little background help with the technical support. So thank you, Kaz and
Yes.
Sarah, for helping. Um, so we've got some hellos, and Laura Hamilton, hi Laura, says, hi both, book 3 already, have book 2 in the TBR after enjoying book 1. So for
Okay.
anyone who hasn't read the first 2, give us a
Yes.
little hint if you can about what, you know, when we first meet Jan, bring it up
Yes.
to present
I
day.
mean, the very first book is called The Two Deaths of Ruth Lyle, and I have it here. And I was quite proud of this because most of the time I don't have much input into what the title of a book is. It's decided by Canello, and I've often had my own working title ideas, and they have a good idea of what works in the marketplace, and it's very rarely the one I came up with. But I was very proud of this one because, and I'm sure many of the readers will know, the high concept title. And certainly anyone who's a writer will know the idea of a high concept title is a title that of itself intrigues somebody. So, of course, when you talk about the two deaths of Ruth Lyle or anybody, we say, well, you can only have one death. So you've already got a little bit of a tension there. Say, well, what could have caused that then? And those it's probably the only one I've ever thought up, and it was a great title to start the series with. And it's the story of um, uh, Talentire. Well, Talentire's out on a date, and she's interrupted by a phone call. She's off duty by an officer ringing her up from Ilfracombe, a junior officer who she was a mentor for. And he says, "Oh, we got something terrible happened here, and there's hardly any of us. And there's a dead body that they found in a disused church." And she says, "Oh, good grief! That's something that doesn't happen very often." And he says, "Yeah, and she was impaled on a crucifix, and it's really gory. And I'm sorry, I was sick at the crime scene, and just the thing that does happen, of course, mustn't ever happen. Putting DNA all over the place from the police officer, but an inexperienced guy. And so eventually she says, "Okay, if there's really nobody else there, I will come up and take a look at it." And she comes up to Ilfracombe, and she does indeed find this woman in her 60s lying there with looks like a sharpened crucifix in her abdomen, and she's quite dead and has been dead for a little while. Anyway, so she takes care of things in the way that she does, and then the local inspector, who's actually based in the town, comes in and says, "Oh, what's this? What's happened then?" And she said, "Well, in some ways, it's quite straightforward. We found some ID on the woman. Um, her name's Ruth Lyle. She's aged, I think it was 62, and she's got an address in the town, and she was impaled on a crucifix." And the inspector says, "No, you can't be dead because she already died. This woman, Ruth Lyle, was killed back in the 1970s. It was a very famous case. Had you not heard of it, Jan?" he asks. And she says, "Well, no, I wasn't in the area then." He said, "No, it was an infamous case. And she was stabbed with a crucifix." And Jan goes, "Good God, no." So what you have is two crimes 50 years apart, the same modus operandi, and it actually turns out to be, they established pretty quickly that it's the same location, because the disused church had been turned into an Airbnb this time. But the original 16-year-old Ruth Lyle was stabbed in a disused church, and it's now an Airbnb. It's been converted. And apparently, a woman of the same name killed all over again. So, I mean, it's quite a good way to start the series, because you've got quite an intriguing plot to begin with. And then she has to try and figure out, well, is this the same person or is it a different person? And so you've got a story which is very much about identity. And it explores many of the aspects of identity, many of them, and I won't give any further details about it, but many of them with a very modern overtone. And the story obviously goes back to, it wasn't a cold case because someone was sentenced to prison for it, and he's only just been released. So could it have been the same person? So I was quite proud of that plot, to put it together there. But it's the only one where the first thing I thought of was the title, and then I thought of a plot that actually worked with it. Usually it's the other way around, that I start with the plot and then try and build up a name for it. But in the end, it's usually that Canello who comes up with the name. They came up with The Dark Edge, which I thought was really good. So that's the first book in the series. The second book, The Last Ride, I decided, because both the first book and the third are about people who are in their 50s and 60s, that I wanted a book about youngsters. And so I came up with this plot, about The Last Ride is a story of joyriders. And of course, we all know, joyriders are a fact of modern crime. And there are many accidents involving joyriders. But what we have here is something with a twist, because this bunch of youngsters from Cornwall decide to head off to Dartmoor in the middle of the night. And they've stolen a car. And of course, like joyriders often do, everything they do, they put on social media. The car's pulling donuts in the car park of the local Asda, and someone's hanging out the side, taking a picture, and all the dangerous things they do. And then there's this horrific accident about 2 o'clock in the morning from memory, and the car crashes at very high speed into the wall of a house right in the middle of the moor. And a very old man sort of shuffles out of his bed to go and see what's happened, and it's just awful mayhem there. And so while most of the youngsters in the car are, being retrieved, they're mostly unconscious, certainly all injured. There then comes this story of a mother who says, "Oh, is my Jade there?" And the police at the time say, "Well, is that your daughter?" "Yes, Jade. She was in that car, and she's not there." And then they're trying to work out, well, was she there at any time? And of course, one of the things this story is about the intelligence of cars. Cars have, if you like, with they're computers on wheels, and almost everything about your journey is recorded by the car on its computer. So, for example, when any door opens and when it's closed, it will be recorded on the car at a certain time. It will know from GPS, it will know where the car was when the door opened. It won't know who got in or who got out, but it will know if they put a seatbelt on. It will also know what speed the car was going at. It will know if the sunroof opened. It will also know what music was being listened to at the time. So a great deal of information is there, and I wanted to put this across so that people realise about their own cars just how much a car knows about them. But we have the situation in which they try to find out whether Jade was in the car or not, and if so, if she wasn't in the car and is therefore not injured at the site, where on earth is she? So that's really the main story there, and it develops in that way. And I was very fortunate to have the assistance of two of the most prominent forensic accident investigators in the country to help me with that, and they explained to me exactly how much information a car has and how people like them are able to extract information from a car and to know exactly what was happening in the few minutes before it collided, before there's an accident. And there's these sort of hardened airbag units which actually hold a lot of the information that the car computer has. Even if the car itself is smashed to smithereens, these ruggedized units will keep the last 5 minutes of data from the car. So it's very much like an airline black box.
Mm.
And so the whole story is very much a modern policing. Although it's a mystery, it incorporates a lot of really up to date police techniques. And I always like to do that. I've been a journalist in the past, and every story has to be contemporary and as up to date as I can make it. So I have lots of contacts with the police and the emergency services to make sure that I can keep it accurate. So that's the second book in the series. The third one is the one we're talking about, and the fourth book is the one in which the fight between Jan and her nemesis, Brent West, comes to a climax. So that's one to look forward to.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
and that will be on the that'll be coming out in November, and yeah, that's I think I shall look forward to the reaction to that, because there are some people who've been working through this secondary story since it was first came up in The Last Ride, when Brent West was the senior officer in charge in the investigation into the accident. Um, and yeah, so that's really good. I think this is one. I mean, I write two books a year, and one of the things I wanted to mention at this point is that I had a stroke in January, and that I was and I spent a month in a hospital in Tenerife, trying to recover from this. And my poor wife was left to try and cope with everything, and the insurance company were absolutely rubbish. A very traumatic event all round, and I fought really hard to get my fitness back. As I say, I was paralysed down my left hand side for a while. I never lost my voice, but ironically, the one thing that it hasn't got in the way of is writing. It's got in the way of everything else.
Mm.
I mean, I've got to the stage now, where I can ride my bike again, which was a really big ambition and a very difficult thing to do after you've had a stroke, because
Yeah.
your my left hand and my left foot both need to be working together, and they both need concentration, as well as me making sure that my balance is good. So I've done my first length of the swimming pool, and various other things. But I was absolutely determined to get my fitness back. But even the bit of fitness, it's only 5 months ago, so it's a very quick recovery.
Mm.
But even there are lots of things I still can't do like I did before. And my energy levels are much lower. And I did think, well, am I going to be able to manage two books a year? But I think I am, because I'm not pushing them up a hill. I'm just actually thinking of them, and the profusion of ideas has not been inhibited at all. Um, with a badly behaving left hand, typing is more difficult, but I do generally use voice dictation software, so that's always been a great productivity aid. Um, and never more so than when I can't rely on my left hand to hit the correct keys. So that's been really good. So um, in the end, I actually turned out to only be a month behind, and that was effectively the month I was in
Wow.
hospital. And I've since caught up. So I'm really still I'm on schedule now.
That's incredible.
So
That is
that
some
was
determination.
Yes, yes, I was absolutely determined to get everything back. I haven't got it all back yet. Um, but yeah, there are. I mean, what I really concentrated on was not what I did, what I couldn't do, but what I was getting back. And every day I realised that there was something I could do that I couldn't do yesterday. So the first time I could hold a fork in my left hand and eat my own food without having it cut up for me, that was quite an early stage, but it was a huge, significant event because it meant
Absolutely.
I could go to a restaurant and not have people staring at me with food being flowing thrown all over the place. Those things are really important. You have to, push your way back into the life you had before. But it's so very important to be positive, and do all your exercises and just see the progress that you can make. I'm sure there are many people watching who have had a stroke or have known someone who's had a stroke, and um, it can be really hard to recover from, but you have to be so determined. So I'm very fortunate. If I had a physical kind of job, I'm sure I wouldn't be talking to you today and saying, "Oh yes, it's fine." I'm very fortunate because of the kind of work it was, and also that it was the right hand side of my brain that was affected, which means it's the left hand side of my body. If it'd been the other way around, I might have lost my speech centres, and that would have been a completely different thing. That would have been much tougher. So I have been very fortunate.
We did say we were talking just before we were live, and I did say you haven't done things by halves.
No.
There is nothing easy about you being on holiday when it happened, and then the 6 months, 5 6 months since. There's an awful lot. We have got a message that Audrey, she was saying she loves Jan's Halentire and says get well soon. That's Audrey Ross.
Oh, that's nice of her.
And Sarah Blackburn says she's nursed stroke patients and you're doing really well.
Oh,
So that's always nice to
yeah.
hear.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I certainly um, the the people I spoke to in the NHS said I've been really, really quick to get everything back. I mean, I was quite fit to begin with. I cycled, walk everywhere locally, don't use the car that much. I'm not overweight or anything like that. I didn't have most of the indicators. So it's quite surprising to me, certainly, that I had a stroke to begin with. So, and fitness does help you recover. But yeah, but I think it is all about attitude. You really have to fight to do that. So it was very nice to have got messages from people wishing me well.
We had another question from Sarah, which says,
Yeah.
if your books were to be on TV, who do you see playing Jan? Is this something you've considered?
No, it isn't. And in fact, the funny thing was, my wife said to me, "You should think about who you'd like to play Jan." She just said to me about 15 minutes before we started. You should think about that because someone's going to ask. I, I can't think who it would be. I mean, Jan's a good-looking woman, and I thought perhaps Gemma Arterton would be a good person to play her. But she's very glamorous. I don't know if Jan is supposed to be quite that glamorous, but that would be nice if she was available and if somebody wanted to make a program on one of my books.
I just had a quick Google because I'm not very good at putting, actors' names and faces together in my
Mm.
head. So I knew she sounded familiar. She's a very, very
Yes,
attractive woman.
she is. She is. Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
I also had a comment from Sarah that said, and Sarah's English, um, British, and said she had to Google hard standing. So, for anyone who's watching who doesn't know, do you want to explain hard standing?
Yeah, I mean, hard standing is just either a patch of concrete or asphalt where someone can park a vehicle, and it's often surrounded. It might be at the back of a house where it's otherwise grass, um, and it's often a very informally done area, but it's just somewhere that you can actually leave a vehicle. Um,
Just
yes, it's
something
not a very
practical, isn't it?
important, a practical thing. Yes, but it's amazing the number of things you have to describe
Mm.
in a book. I mean, there's a section two deaths of Ruth Lyle in a disused church, as I was saying, and I dug deep into a lexicon of church architecture in order to describe some of the different types of windows that they had, mullioned windows, or there's a certain name which I've forgotten now for sort of very narrow, high windows that you get in a church, in order to accurately describe them. Even though, as aware as I was using these terms, that a lot of readers might not be familiar with them. And then you're describing things like someone, being on a balcony somewhere, and trying to just use words to show the relationship between someone standing and looking down at somebody else, and so, to make sure there's no ambiguity. That is one of them. I find that one of the most difficult things about writing is actually deploying sometimes just very ordinary vocabulary to actually make it absolutely clear where, let's say, where your detective is standing and where the person who's sneaking up at them to attack them is standing, and to make sure that you can put the reader exactly there. And it's particularly important, of course, not just for books themselves, but for audiobooks. So I'm always thinking about how something is going to sound when it's read out, to make sure that this can possibly go across. So that's one of the reasons I don't have too many emails and texts with emojis and so on, even though they're obviously an important part of the modern world, because they're very hard to read out. And so I'm always having to think, if I make something that's absolutely crucial in the book and it's a text and you've got two or three emojis on there, then the narrator is just going to have to refer to the fact, oh, well, there are some emojis here, because you can't read them out. So I'm always trying to think, what it's going to be like in each of the formats. And audiobooks, I have to say, I mean, I sell more audiobooks than print or ebook now. And it's been a huge area for me. I think it's probably true of many authors. It's certainly been the fastest growing format in recent years. And so it certainly behoves me to make sure I think about the narrator when I put any scene together.
Definitely. I was thinking of when you were, excuse me, when we're talking about different words for different things.
Yes.
Had a conversation with a CSI from West Yorkshire Police earlier this week, and he was saying that there was one bit where he was describing something. He said, "Oh, it's a ginnel, it's an alleyway, it's a snicket," and then
Yes.
kind of like moved on. And I just thought, well, that just covers the whole thing.
Yes.
There were so
But
many,
not
and
all
it
of
was
them.
just all said. No, not all of them, but enough that you could get an idea of the context. If you didn't know, you could pick out
Absolutely.
one of them and go, right, okay, yeah, I like that. I like that.
Well, just around the corner from where I live, I'm living. Yeah, so just around the corner from where I live, I live in the town of Bez, my own name, in Lincolnshire, and there's a little alleyway called Paradise Smoot. So smoot is a Lincolnshire term for a ginnel or a back alley. So there are lots of them. I have
Smoot. I like
my books aren't set here, so I've never had the chance to use it, but it's a wonderful word. There is a There's even a music album called Paradise Smoot, which was by a band, who are in Louth, and it's actually got a picture of the sign there. But I think smoot is a lovely word.
that. Is a lovely word. At first, I thought you'd
Yeah,
said snoots, which is another word for nose, but and then I realised
no,
you'd said smoot. That is a nice word.
it is, isn't it? Yeah,
We are
I like
coming
I
up
like
to.
ginnel as
Sorry,
well.
go on.
No, I like ginnel as well. I think that's a really good word, and I think, as I say, that's a Yorkshire one, isn't it? Ginnel,
It is, and we use it in Manchester as well, so it's
right?
definitely a northern thing, I think.
Yeah,
I'm going to have people telling me it's not now, aren't I? But I
probably.
associate it as a northern thing.
Yes,
We are coming up towards the end. That has absolutely flown.
it
And
has.
do you want to give us just a quick reminder of the books that everyone's going to go and buy, starting with The Dark Edge, which is brilliant?
Okay.
Have you had
Well, the
anyone, just out of interest, has anyone said that they had figured anything out yet? That's all. That's as far as we're going to take the question. But has anyone
no,
kind of got anything yet?
no. I mean, I think that's one of the books that's probably more difficult to figure out than others. I mean, I think I've got better at it since the Gillard days, of hiding, the culprit. I mean, I think if your perpetrator is revealed early on, you need to have a really good story to keep the tension after the big reveal. I mean, I try to have the big reveal at least 80% into the book, if not further. Um, some people have it on the last page, but quite often you need some explanation of why it was and how it was that this person committed the crime. Um, but yeah, so anyway, I can't remember what the point I was going to make for that. But yes, the first book in that series is the Two Deaths of Ruth Lyle. Let's get that there, and I think we talked about that. Then the last ride is the one about the Joy Riders, and the Dark Edge. The following one is called The Deep End, and that will be coming out in November. And we did at the start. We were talking. You were talking about your donating your hair, Sam, and because you're going to have
It's getting quite long now, just for
yes,
anyone who's. I'm kind of sitting on it.
yeah,
So,
it's very
yeah.
very impressive. To a man of my age, none of us can produce enough hair to even cover our heads, yet alone to donate to anybody. But I think it explains a lot of the beards you find in people who are over 60, because it's the one place you can grow it. But I'd mentioned that I always try to put in something new in my books that people won't have come across before. And um, in the Deep End, there's a woman who's washed up on the south coast of Devon, she's wearing a wetsuit, and she has no ID on her at all. The only distinctive feature about her is the fact she's wearing hair extensions, and the police use the hair extensions to try and find out who she is. Now, as part of that, I went to a local hairdresser who specialised in those, and I got her to explain to me all about the different ways they're attached, the different types of hair. There's a hair called Ramie hair, which is a kind of virgin hair that's never been bleached, that's never been washed in anything corrosive, and the sources of this hair. People who in India or in the Far East who sell their hair, and it's a good source of income to them. And then it goes on to make hair extensions, often for people in the
Mm.
West. And this is a whole industry, but also the distinctive nature in which these are attached with this either tiny little nano beads or with stitching and so on. And to my knowledge, there's not been any other murder mysteries where this has been a crucial part of it. And I'm always very proud to try and put in something that I think is new. But I'm probably one of the very few blokes who knows even the first thing about hair extensions, because I've done all the training now, and I could certainly do with my own hair extending. So, but it's always nice to have something different in a book.
Audrey has one final question that I know we've gone slightly over, but we did start slightly late, so
You did start
I
slightly
think we
late.
can manage that.
We can squeeze in a
Um,
couple of minutes for Audrey, I'm sure.
Before we do that, because we will finish on Audrey's question, Laura Hamilton says she's done a donation to Little Princess Trust, which is where my hair will be going.
Oh.
Mine was nearly as long. Careful when you stand up; the changing weight will give you a light head, a dizzy spell. It's a quick way to lose some weight, I suppose. Lop all this hair
Yeah,
off. There's blooming loads of it.
yeah,
It's just really
oh,
funny that I keep getting stuck now. Go to stand up and I can't, and have
yeah.
to drag it all out of the way. But Audrey's question, she's thanked you for giving your time up for the evening. So thank you from all of us, because you are fascinating. I'm glad I got you this time. We
Okay.
fight it out amongst us to try and be fair, but it doesn't always work out. Cheeky question: is Craig Gillard going to come back? She misses him.
Well, I am asked this a lot, and I think I can actually reveal that he will come back. There will be a 13th book at some stage. I can't say when, in which he will feature. It may either be another Gillard book, or it might be a bit more than a cameo in one of the Talentire books. But he will appear again. So yes, he's not gone. And I would just very quickly say one of the reasons about changing the series to the Talentire series and not having Craig carry on forever is that the title convention for the Gillard books was a body, the body in the marsh, the body on the moor, the body on the island, and that kind of thing. I was running out of places to put the bodies. And sometimes, as part of the plot, you actually want the location of the body to be part of the mystery. So it was quite limiting in a way. But when it got to 7 or 8 books into it, there was no way I could change it. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to start a new detective and start a new series. Nothing. I wasn't fed up with Craig at all. I still think he's a great character. But yeah, and I don't know for those of you who've got to the end of the Gillard series, book 12. He had quite some difficulties in book 12, but he will be back.
And we are all happy to hear that. And we oh, Laura's saying she's going to get reading and catch up now, which is always a nice thing to hear. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick. I've had a
Oh, it's
really
been a
lovely
great
time
pleasure.
catching up,
Thank you for having me, Sam. It's been
and
it's been delightful. Thank
I
you.
hope you'll come back for the next book.
I will do. Yeah, yeah. You
Thank
invite
you.
me, and I'll definitely be around.
And thank you to everyone who's watched and asked questions and given me tech support. We are very grateful, myself and Nick, to all of you.
Yes, I'm always grateful for tech support.